Namaste, everyone. Welcome to Biases Against Hindus in North America, a session that will discuss some of the biases that the Hindu community in North America has been facing. In particularly, we are going to be talking about the recent Dismantling Global Hindutva Conference, the recently concluded Dismantling Global Hindutva Conference. And we're going to make sure that we talk about some of the challenges that we saw within the conferences, confirming some of the issues that we had already highlighted in the email campaigns and the thousands of people that reached out to various types of various universities, departments, alumni, various bodies, lawmakers, etc. As many of you may have attended the conference, there were some interesting comments that were made, some very anti-Hindu and very Hindu-phobic comments in nature. So we'll discuss some of those comments and what it means for us as Hindu Americans and Hindu Canadians, and what is the way forward. Naturally, this is not the only bias incident or Hindu-phobic event that has been going on. We saw in Atlanta signs that were put up saying no dots. So some of our Hindu community members, Kona members, reached out to lawmakers to get them to condemn the events and the types of hate messages that were put out in Atlanta. But these are all the things that are kind of vexing the Hindu community in America, and some of the other things that are going on in Canada as well. So we'll talk about some of that, but our big focus is going to be on deconstructing the Dismantling Global Hindutva Conference. My name is Nikunj Trivedi, and I'm the president of Kona. With me, I have Richa Gautamji. She's on the steering committee of Kona as well. And Richa ji, welcome. So what I would like to do first is I want to play a video that there's a group called the Hindu on Campus actually put out. So I think that's a very good video that we can actually show to people. So let me do that. Give me 1 second. I'm going to try to play that video from here. See if I can get that done. Let me find that video for a second.
Is this the one where they say, where they have given a good understanding of who the speakers are?
That's right.
Yes, I think that is a most important video.
I am not able to find that video. Okay, maybe this one is there. Let's see if I can share this screen of mine. Okay, perfect. So I can see that here. My apologies. Technology sometimes is challenging. Okay, here we go. Can you hear it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we could. Oh, there is no audio, Padmaji. Can you hear the?
Let's try again.
Hear me?
Give me a second. I think I know what happened here.
Okay. The video is not on, but can you hear us? I hope they can hear us. The video is starting now. The screen sharing just started, right?
Are the panelists saying that the caste system is inseparable from Hinduism? And if that is the case, then why not dismantle Hinduism and not just Hindutva?
Hindutva project is not merely the control of the BJP. Hindutva project is to actually spread the tentacles of Hinduism in every society.
These guys are corporate malignant Brahmins, as I call. Sundarayar and Ramana Kompala.
All right, looks like there's a problem with the video.
Ayers, Kompala,
I think
Sharmas,
I'm not sure what's going on, but
they seem to be violent advocates of this kind.
okay, let's try one more time, one last time. Okay, so they can only see my computer screen. Let me go to Twitter and see if we can play that. Okay, so let's try this last time. If not, then we'll talk about the video. I think many people have seen the video, but I wanted to play that on the webinar so we can actually. All right, so. I think this is going to work now.
Are the panelists saying that the caste system is inseparable from Hinduism? And if that is the case, then why not dismantle Hinduism and not just Hindutva?
Hindutva project is not merely the control of the BJP.
Do you want me to try?
Yes, please try that on your end. For some reason, it's today technology is not playing nice with me.
Just trying to see.
Let me try one last time because it might just play in within the channel.
Did I start screen share or no?
Yep, you didn't. I'm trying one last time, and then you can go ahead. Then I'll.
Oh, wait. Is it working for me or no?
No, let's try mine now.
Okay, sounds good.
Project is to actually spread the tentacles of Hinduism in every society.
These guys are corporate malignant Brahmins, as I call. Sundarayar and Ramana Kompala.
No, looks like it's streaming. It's just buffering for some reason. You can try from your end, and then we'll move on.
Sounds good. Let me make one last attempt.
Yeah, something's wrong with my screen. For some reason, it's not streaming properly today.
So, can you see my screen?
I can see your screen. Yep. I can't see your screen yet. No, not yet. I think everyone's saying that we can't see your screen.
So I've selected and now I'm saying share.
Optimize the sound. You have to select the sound. At the bottom, screen share. When you share the screen, there's a little bottom button that says send sound, share sound. So you can stop sharing. We can see it's visible, but it's blank right now.
It's blank. Now?
Yeah, so we can see the screen, not the sound.
Oh, not the sound.
I think it has to do with the fact that you stop sharing and then go back. When you share screen, before you hit the share button, at the bottom left, it says share sound. You have to click that option. Bottom left side.
How about we, okay. Mm-hmm. I don't see that bottom left, mute, it just says micro. We really don't have that. Audio settings, you mean?
No,
How
screen
about
share.
we skip this video for now and move to the next one? Because if it's not sharing the sound on its own, I guess I'm sort of technologically challenged from that point.
Okay, let's give it a shot. You can, if you want to stop sharing your screen, let's move forward. I'll try one last time. Let me see if I can try this again. If not, then we'll talk about the actual videos and stuff like that.
Sounds good. Because I think this sharing, I mean, it's important, like you said, but if it's not working, I guess
we can move on from there.
We can move on, because I think by now, a lot of us have already seen the sort of, people who attended that conference and the kind of background that they had. They have the links with the Maoists or with, some of the breaking India forces, I would say. So,
so let's start with the first one. So the video that I was trying to play, in the first question that is asked, right, that is caste inextricably linked with Hinduism, and in order for us to get rid of the caste system, do we have to dismantle Hinduism, right? That's the question that was asked by the panelists, by the moderator first, and that itself poses a very interesting opening, right, as far as the conference is concerned. And this is the theme that concerns me, because this happens to be across the board. It's not just one particular panel or one particular person talking. It's across the board. So let's talk about that first, right? So right off the bat, we can see, as we had said earlier, that the conference is not about dismantling Hindutva, which is mistranslated according to many of these folks anyways. But barring that discussion, it's really about dismantling Hinduism. So the panelist, her name is Rupa Vishwanathan, she basically she asks a question to the panel that's going to be talking, and we'll talk about the panel in a second. Do we need to dismantle Hinduism? And she's, with a smile, she asked that question. It's a very telling sign of how some of these folks really look at Hinduism and the type of disdain that they have for things Hindu, right? So that question tells you that it's not a real question to be asked. It's really, can you talk about how to dismantle Hinduism, right? They could have rephrased it that way. So, how did you feel about that when you heard that question?
I mean, for me, the biggest thing was that the whole propaganda and the way they countered us is two ways. One is they said Hindutva is not Hinduism, and we are talking specifically about Hindutva. So from that point of view, now in the conference, there's a complete U-turn, right? They completely start talking about how to dismantle Hinduism, because caste and Hinduism are inseparable, and caste is an evil. So, which means by default, Hinduism is evil. So that threat to a large population of 1 billion plus is actually is very, that was what concerned me the most. And secondly, the fact that they came to every panelist pretty much came and started out saying, we received threats. I mean, really, I cannot believe that, the intellectual capabilities of this population that lives in the diaspora and the kind of, discourse that we have in general, I can never believe that there was a threat. If there was, why did they not come out in public with those threats, or go to the police with those threats? So those two lies really define the entire conference, plus, of course, the kind of people that they had assembled,
Absolutely. And I agree with you on that, because, for example, they have been saying right from the beginning, when we first started the campaigns and other Hindu organizations, 150 Hindu organizations, temples, spiritual groups signed our letter, right, expressing concerns. So are all these people Hindutva? If they're all Hindutva, then what's the difference between Hinduism and Hindutva, which we have been saying that in the beginning, right? So this clarifies, it makes it very clear. Now, what's important to keep in mind is the insistence upon the fact that anybody who is protesting against this conference is some kind of a Hindu extremist. So the entire diaspora, or all those of us who are protesting, are Hindu extremists. There's no conversation here to be had. If they're not ready to listen to our viewpoints, right? They're not ready to listen to why we are concerned about this conference. It's not about, and as you had mentioned, it's a political rally. It's not about, you can have your political rally, you have the right to dissent on a particular political party's viewpoints, policies, a particular government's viewpoints. But when you take a religion and essentially summarily dismiss it and call it a extremist, oppressive religion, things like that, that is where the Hindu community has a problem. So this panelist that we just said, the opening question was, it's really about dismantling Hinduism. Now let's talk about one of the most egregious things that I saw particularly. So on day one, session 3, Dr. Gajendran Ayutrai of Göttingen University essentially had that clip where he played, he had a presentation on caste and Brahmins and things like that. One of the things that he said, he had a picture of 2 individuals who have not even been found guilty yet, right? And he essentially doxed these people and put their pictures out there and said these 2 individuals are called corporate malignant Brahmins. Now imagine those words, right? Was for people who don't understand what malignant Brahmins really, corporate malignant Brahmins really means, or what that context is really important. That means essentially anybody who is a quote unquote Brahmin are malignant, right? They're cancerous, they're violent Brahmins who are out to get minorities and Dalits and sort of the lower castes and things like that. And these 2 guys, as he says, they symbolize that violent corporate malignant Brahminism, which will come to the idea of Brahminism in a little bit later anyways. But the point here is that essentially a large portion of the Hindu working force that's in corporate America, you call from the CEOs, Satya Nadella, Sundar Pichai types of people, all the way to the regular workers, they have basically been called corporate malignant Brahmins, right? This cancerous, violent Brahmins who are out to get minorities. Completely unfounded and extremely shocking. But what really disturbs me is the next piece of it. He identifies 5 last names, right? Iyer, Trivedi, like my last name, Sharma, Mukherjee, and Kompella, right? 5 last names identified, singled out, and put a target on. This is extremely dangerous. And that shows the nature of the type of hate that this type of conference is trying to peddle. And there was no denouncement of these things. There was no people, for example, Professor Audrey Trushke actually retweeted, and she said, Professor Gajendran Ayutrai speaks the truth. Right. Wow, really? He's speaking the truth? He's handing out essentially 5 names that any corporation should now think about. Think about the impact on Hindu students, right? Richaji, you have a daughter, and I have a daughter, and think about that, right? It's like, luckily she didn't say Gautam, or he didn't say Gautam, right? But he said Trivedi. So like, come on, right? So now I'm thinking, I have a small daughter. She's supposed to be, and what he says is that these are violent advocates of malignant Brahminism. Extremely loaded words, extremely dangerous words, very Hindu-phobic. Now, if that is not Hinduphobia, I am not sure what Hinduphobia really is, right? Imagine they said this about any other group, any other religion. Would that even be tolerated? But looks like it's open hunting season for the Hindus. So, tell me, like, you're a mother, and now think about this, right? What do you think the students are thinking here, right? What would your as a mother, what do you feel about this?
I mean, it is a personal attack on each one of us. If they are attacking 5 last names right now, we are next. That is the kind of feeling I get. And of course, on the campuses, it definitely, if this is an academic setting, which they are calling it academic, what does that mean? That there is an infestation of this sort of discourse within closed setting as well inside universities. Most of our children are in STEM, right? We have sort of steered away from this liberal, sort of liberal arts and, the kind of social sciences that are peddling this sort of hate. And let us face it, clearly that this is not the first time this kind of conference must have been held. Obviously, this discourse has been going on for a long time. This is the first time they took it out in the open and held it on a public platform, probably, which is why we got to know it so clearly. So it scares me. No doubt this scares me. It scares me also that they are so one-sided and they still call it academic. We have discussed this many times. If they want to talk about Hindutva, please call us, call people who are Hindus, who also have a different point of view, and please let us talk about it. We also have a point of view. I also want to just point out that Pew Research, right? Pew Research in India and Carnegie Endowment here clearly has shown very clear points, which, if we have time, I just want to reiterate them. One is that caste as a concept was implemented by the British, and it is found across all religions in India, right? Because it was a colonial imposition. So how are they singling out Hindus then, right? Secondly, there is no Brahminical patriarchy. First of all, we don't really follow our, as a Brahmin, you may be working in a financial sector. You are not practicing religious, right? You're not practicing anything religious. You don't have, a hierarchy of people under you, of which they claim Brahmins did, which we counter all the time, that we had a more horizontal kind of system, not a vertical system. So that, and then they have also found that Brahmins were equally poor, SES. There was no discrimination when they looked at the really, below poverty line people in the Pew Research survey. There was no such demarcation that Brahmins are all rich or, lesser rich. There were equal number of SCSTs who were poor, equal number of Brahmins who were poor. So again, we said it's horizontal, not vertical. And the other thing I want to just say that there was no discrimination observed by the larger population, the sample or the projected sample. They did not find that there was large-scale caste discrimination. In fact, in India, 80% of the people said that there was no religious discrimination that they personally felt, or there was no caste discrimination experienced by people. So that has completely been obliterated in this conference. They did not even cover Pew Research. They did not cover that Carnegie Endowment has clearly said that caste discrimination was so minuscule and so complicated in its responses that they could not even quantify it, So people felt discriminated, but it was by color or by race, but not really by caste. So all of that really, it's telling on the fact that this conference is very biased and targeting Hindus very clearly.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And, so that whole idea of this, superimposing India's issues onto the diaspora, right? So the Indian political issues, whether there is, no doubt there is social discrimination, right? Just like every society. So we can't disown that. But at the same time, imposing that. So it's like basically saying like a Chinese American has to answer for China's policy actions or issues that go on in China, or a Korean American has to think about like issues going on in North Korea or South Korea. So many different things, right? Someone who is from Brazil has to answer what Bolsonaro is doing and why he's doing this, or why Brazil is so like this, right? Imagine that kind of a treatment accorded to the diasporic community from those countries. That's what's going on with India, right? With the Indian American community, specifically the Hindu American community is singularly targeted. as some kind of a sort of extension or a front of the Indian government, right? I mean, think about it. Your daughter has grown up here. My daughter is born and raised here. And they have no clue about these things, and nor should they, right? Because they're not connected to those dynamics. They are Hindus from a practice perspective. They are of Indian origin from as far as we are concerned, but they are not liable, or they're not considered. They're American citizens and they're Canadian citizens and things like that who are from here. So to say and imply that somehow they need to answer for those types of policies, completely unacceptable. And that's what there's no discussion in this particular conference, or very few points made about the dynamics in the diaspora here in this side of the world. It was all focused on the so-called quote unquote problems of India, and as if we don't have any voice, and everything that goes on in India is superimposed here. Now let's talk about the next point. The next point was the same speaker, Dr. Ayutthaya, says Brahmanism played a very crucial role in the creation of Nazism itself. Now, this is based on one guy's book, okay? And by the way, the book doesn't even say this word. It's actually the word that is used by Dr. Ayutthaya. He proposes that Brahmanism played a very crucial role in the creation of Nazism itself. I mean, if you talk to a Jewish person about this, okay, or you talk to those who have been impacted by Nazism and say, this guy is basically claiming that Hindus are somehow responsible for the creation of Nazism, they would find it deeply offensive and just basically laugh at it, And I've had, after this conference, I had calls and meetings with a bunch of Jewish leaders, and they're extremely upset with this type of nonsense, because they know where Hindus stand and how the Hindu community has been in solidarity with the Jewish community on various types of things that they have faced, so on and so forth. They were extremely disturbed by this. But the problem is that, again, it comes back to the whole Hinduphobia generation, that not only is Hinduism casteist, now they're taking the ante to something else, that Hinduism is responsible for the worst, sort of like the worst things in modern history, like Nazism, and inspired it. And I don't see a difference. So I'll come to the Brahmanism concept in a bit, but they use Brahmanism as a trope, as a slur for Hindus, okay? At one point, there's a speaker there, Meena Kandasamy, basically says Sanatana Dharma is inherently oppressive.
Right.
All right. So now you can't say Brahmanism versus Hinduism, because now you're saying Sanatana Dharma. Hindus used the word Sanatana Dharma to define their indigenous tradition. We don't use Hinduism. Many of us don't use Hinduism. Only when we talk in Western lenses and viewpoints that we may use the word Hinduism. But we use Sanatana Dharma when discussing internally. That's how. So if you're saying essentially Sanatana Dharma is inherently oppressive, but now it's responsible for Nazism, that is extremely dangerous. It's basically trying to put they're trying to equate the whole idea of racism, Nazism, etc. onto Hindus. Okay, but it also whitewashes the history of how Nazism came about, right? And today is not the place to talk about that. We'll bring in other speakers to talk about it. But Nazism was deeply influenced by Christian values. And there's very strong evidence, the misappropriation of Christian values into Nazism. And there's a professor by the name of Susanna Heschel out of Dartmouth University. She has written about the Aryan Jew, or the Aryan Christ, the Aryan Christ, where she talks about how the idea of Christianity was interwoven and misappropriated by the Nazi movement at that time. And the church supported that. Now there are Vatican documents that are being declassified to show Pope Pius actively supported Nazis, right? So these are the types of things that are completely missing from the discourse. And it just shows how shallow and how inaccurate and how false these academics are, where they're not even bringing out the real history of how Nazism came about and trying to show Hindus as the worst culprits in the world. So I found that to be extremely dangerous. And frankly speaking, it'll hurt the sentiments of so many people that have been destroyed by the Nazis. Now let's talk about the next one. And this is something that we can talk about.
If I may just add to that, the Jews always recognize, Israel as a country recognizes that India was that one place where the Jews were never persecuted, right? Yeah. And that point can never be forgotten, because the Jews really recognize us even today as, those peoples that are equally persecuted. And I have had many conversations with Jewish people as well. And they have really said that, the kind of Hinduphobia that's growing in the United States, they can relate to it, and they probably have some ways to probably help us. So there you go. The whole idea of, that Hinduism and Brahminical and Nazism and trying to conflate everything, it is never going to hold. As much as you try, those fallacies can never hold, because the truth is exactly the opposite.
Yeah. The challenge though there is, and 2 points on that. First, I want to correct one thing, that most people think India never persecuted Jews. That's actually incorrect. It's the Hindus that never persecuted Jews, because India was under different rules. Okay.
Yes.
And those regimes actually persecuted Jews.
That is so
it's the
true.
Hindus that actually did not persecute Jews. So we have to be, as Hindu Americans or Hindus globally, we need to be very clear that when Hindus did not persecute Jews, it was other regimes within India that persecuted Jews. So it's very important to clarify that. So I just wanted to
So that's a very good point. If I may quickly add Jam Sahib's story, Jam Sahib is the king of Jamnagar.
Jamnagar, of course.
Yes. our whole,
my ancestral towns.
Really?
Yeah,
interesting.
my parents are close to Jamnagar.
But you're a Trivedi.
Yeah.
But all I'm saying is that he basically countered the British. The British did not want a ship of Jewish children who had escaped the Holocaust and were coming from Poland to the shores of Gujarat. And he, completely went against the British, who were not keen to have them come. And if those kids had not been taken in by Jam Sahib, then those kids would have died, obviously. But he brought them up, and they still celebrate that. There is a square in Poland named, in Warsaw, named after Jam Sahib also.
Yeah, and in the United Nations, they actually had a session on this. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah.
So let's move on.
A lot of history, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And that's a great conversation we'll have with actually a professor that I know on this point. So let's talk about the next piece. And I think this is really important. So there was a discussion where there was an activist, her name is P. Shivakami. She basically said that Hinduism is a danger to independence, equality, and brotherhood. And then she went on to say that no matter what Hindus say, it doesn't matter. Harboring the idea that Hinduism is per se harmless and only Hindutva is the culprit will not do any good to the observance of lofty democratic ideals. All right. Now, this type of, I would say, statement directly contributes to xenophobia that is directed to non-Christian religions. The idea that somehow these religions are un-American, or even in anyone that is sort of Hindu or other religions is sort of un-American and incompatible with democracy, right? That is, it kind of adds to that, right? There's a whole idea in the Western world, and we face this racism that, you know what, Hindus cannot contribute positively because this country is based on Christian American values, those types of things that are brought in by some of the extremist groups. So this argument is very simple. It's, similar to that coming, right? Hinduism itself is so bad that it's undemocratic, that if you have Hinduism, you cannot truly have a democratic and equal nation. That is India. They're speaking about India in this particular situation. Now, tell me a little bit more about that. What are your thoughts on that?
So I have many thoughts on that, actually. But the most important thing is that, the fact that this is an academic discourse clearly points to academic Hinduphobia, which we have in, long and short of it is that we've experienced it for a long time. It's just that now, I want to quote the Economist that recently published an article called "The Threat of the Illiberal Left." This whole discourse comes from that Marxist ideology, and creating that idea of disrupting anything that is civilizational and creating the concepts of oppressed and oppressor. And that whole thing has been superimposed on Hinduism. And it is very dangerous. Like I said, it's very xenophobic, and it is institutionalized in the current universities of the United States and even around the world, which is why we have this conference. And the threat of the illiberal left that The Economist wrote is a very interesting article, and I think everyone should read it, because what they are saying is that the academia used to have these kind of discourses and they acknowledge it across many decades. It's been going on, but now it is being translated on the ground into the polity, into our civic lives. So that is why not only I think Hindus are facing it much more strong than anyone else, right? But even the American system is continuously facing the cancel culture, the wokeism, like we saw the case of Lisa Daftari, which happened on Rutgers, or Subramaniam Swamy, and whether it's anyone, Steve Bannon, anyone who wants to speak on campuses, there is a police, a thought police, a police who will decide whether a conference will be held or not, and whether a speaker is allowed on the campus or not. I think we've been suffering that for a long time, and this is a culmination of this public conference is a culmination of just that thought of the illiberal left completely coming out in the open now and creating ground level activism based on this discourse.
Remember, 1,100 academics have signed a letter that supports this conference. Okay, so I hold all those 1,100 academics liable for targeting Hindus, okay, without mincing any words, because if you read these comments, the fact that Hinduism is a danger to democracy, equality, and brotherhood, Hinduism is oppressive, Hinduism is responsible for Nazism, all of these things, I hold those 1,100 academics responsible. And we will make sure that that is highlighted more and more so. So this is the type of stuff that we have been seeing throughout the conference, right? So let's talk about, but the idea that democracy itself is in danger because of Hinduism is extremely Hinduphobic and dangerous, because India is like 80% Hindu, okay? And through the years, Hindus have always welcomed so many different types of people who have been persecuted throughout the world. And it was because of Hindu values, that these dharmic values, that they have been welcomed in a country where, you talk about Romas, Jews, Muslims, Baha'is, right? The largest Baha'i following in the entire world is in India.
Really?
Right? Yes.
I didn't know
India is the largest. So India has the biggest Baha'i temple, out in Delhi or around Delhi, right? With the lotus, and
Lotus
things
temple,
like that.
yes.
So many of these types of things are out there, right? And it's really amazing that when someone says that Hinduism is a danger to democracy, excuse me, Hindus are the ones who have actually protected minorities. All people who have come to our country. You talked about Jam Sahib, right? Where is he from, right? He was a Hindu, a king in Jamnagar, right? Where some of my ancestors are from. Similarly, you find so many examples. So to say Hinduism is a danger to democracy cannot be farther from truth. But it actually endangers Hindu Americans and Hindu Canadians here. So now think about this. They build this as an academic conference. Now, imagine if someone is using these proceedings for their teaching courses, okay? And they quote someone like this saying, look, Hinduism is a danger to democracy. Now you're saying a micro minority in America, in Canada, is a threat to democracy. So you're giving hate groups ammunition to target our community. That for me is extremely dangerous, because it scares me personally that this type of discourse is targeting, first of all, my last name, and the fact that my mere existence and my religion's mere existence is against democracy. I don't care who you are. You are basically threatening my life and my community's life and safety by saying these types of outrageous statements.
That's so true.
That's what concerns me.
That it is very, very concerning. There is no doubt this is a whole machinery that is, targeting. And like you said, a micro minority is the operative word. We are a minuscule number, but let us also not forget that we are upholders of most of the institutions like Silicon Valley, the corporate, we are the fuel and the engine of many of NASA's discoveries. Silicon Valley, the corporate finance world, we are the civilizational force in this country also. We bring civilization, we bring culture, we bring all the good things, and we are known as that model minority. So we cannot forget that on 9/11, when we should be thinking about the kind of radical terrorist attacks that happened, and they did not happen because of Hindus, but on that very day, there is a deflection of, the energy to us as, we are now the targets, and we are the people who need to be sort of put in the, dock and examined closely as people of concern. But truly, we need to definitely figure out a way to counter this sort of Hinduphobia, see where, how to counter it. I think those are the next steps for us. How are we going to counter this? Because we have sort of stayed away from political and civic engagement for a large time, just focusing on the work and building this nation, and the sort of from pretty much from all of the, like I said, the institutions, whether it's academic institutions, a lot of our people work there as well.
Yeah, exactly. And that will be the next point in the next few minutes once we complete a couple of these other observations. So, like, for example, another Dr. Meena Dhanda, she said that I take Hindutva as political Hinduism, not a distortion of some inherently benign religion, but a historical expression of it, with continuities in the works of Dayanand Saraswati, Vivekananda, Aurobindo, and Savarkar, and then later on she says even Gandhi. So now you have taken some of the most iconic names of Hindus, right? Swami Vivekananda, Aurobindo, Gandhiji, etc., and said that these are Hindutva ideologues. And what is Hindutva? A violent, oppressive way of life. That is Hinduism. So Swami Vivekananda, which, by the way, also in 1893, September 11th, gave one of the biggest speeches and introduced Hindu Dharma to the Western world, right? That person who's revered by hundreds of millions of Hindus and non-Hindus around the world is now considered a Hindutva ideologue, right? Now, that piece, if you think about it, if you reflect upon it, it's so profoundly dangerous that there's nothing good left now. Your entire religion is bad. The most iconic leaders who have been made a name for Hindu Dharma, whose names are legendary with universalism, brotherhood, acceptance. And I don't like the word brotherhood, so I will use universal acceptance, things like that. The whole idea of mutual respect, all of those Hindu principles are being thrown under the bus as Hindutva ideologues in a so-called academic conference that is now co-sponsored by 40, 50, whatever departments of different universities, as well as endorsed by 1,100 plus academics. So my question to those people is, do you consider Gandhi and Vivekananda to be violent Hindu extremists, as these people have tried to portray?
Right,
so that's another angle, right? So this whole idea of Hindutva is not equal to Hinduism, blah, blah, blah. It just falls apart. That whole entire thing just falls apart because speaker after speaker, Dr. Shana Sippi, she said, basically say that there is no Hindutva without Hinduism. Hindutva is inextricably linked to and is a form of Hinduism. And we do not think there is any way to understand Hindutva if you disaggregate it from Hinduism in general. And there is absolutely no way to dismantle it if you're going to ignore the Hinduism of it. It's just clear. In order for you to dismantle Hindutva, you have to dismantle Hinduism. And the same thing said by Dr. Akanksha Mehta. She goes, I, without hesitation, say that Hindutva is indeed inseparable from Hinduism, and arguments of Hindutva is not Hinduism are deeply dangerous, Brahminical, and laced with erasure and violence. They will not take us to the future we aspire. And then finally, Dr. Balmurli Natarajan of William Patterson University says, I did not, at least here, definitely not myself, deny the fact that Hinduism is deeply imbricated with Hindutva. Nobody on this panel has been denying it. So again, I can go on with different speakers, but these are some of the things to highlight that, somebody said, these are the people who are protesting against this conference are Hindutva extremists. who are concerned about academic discourse, robustness of dialogue. There was no dialogue here. There was no discussion with major Hindu organizations. You brought in essentially, your puppets who toe your line and put them as token Hindus. But you did not bring any major Hindu organization, any major sampradaya, any major guru that can challenge your stances vehemently, because you only wanted people who agree with you, right? That's what the concern really is. And that's what the Hindu community really needs to reflect upon. Because now what's going to happen is, and what most people don't realize, the impact of this conference. Some people have told me, oh, why are you making a big deal out of it? Well, let me tell you something. What's going to happen now is they're going to take this information, repackage it into papers, into position, like, these types of like scholarly, and they have made it very clear. If you go to their website, they say, we intend to create scholarly, quote unquote, scholarly materials about Hindutva. So what's going to be included in there? These types of things are going to be included in there. So that's what the danger of such a conference is. Not just about the fact that somebody held a conference. We don't have an issue, again, with people holding conferences, but it's about the fact that what is being talked about and why is a religion being singled out and targeted for dismantling. So, but I want to come to you actually, Richaji, because one of the things that we were discussing was about this clip where a speaker essentially disparaged Ayurveda.
Yes.
Right? And I think you had a very good point that I would like you to talk about. So there was a speaker that basically said that, this whole idea of Ayurveda is being used to tout all sorts of benefits during COVID and this and that, but it tries to mask the violence of cow vigilantism, of violence against Dalits and oppressed castes, and violence against Muslims and all these things. I thought that was very disturbing, because why would you conflate? Ayurveda is itself a discipline and it has its own benefits. What does that have to do with cow vigilantism or any of these things, or any of these controversial things that they're talking about? Right. So I want your thoughts on that, because I know we had a conversation about this before.
Absolutely. The fact is that I want to break it into two parts. The first part, what you just spoke about, Hinduism and Hindutva, and everything is being targeted now. It's not just about, Hindutva is now separate from Hinduism. No, in the conference, that point came out open. The point is that a long time ago, and not very long time ago, the indigenous people of this nation were targeted, they were otherized, and they were called, not a civilized people, right? They were supposed to be those people that needed to be annihilated, just like the woolly mammoths or, other. So there was a whole agenda like that across the world, where certain forces wanted to colonize the whole world, and they managed to do that, except India. India is that only force right now that still carries the ancient indigenous civilization. And that is sort of at loggerheads with what happened during the colonial period in the last 400 years or so, or even longer than that, maybe 800 years. But the British colonialism, actually during the Enlightenment, they clearly established very strong hold on knowledge, power, and wealth, right? So the entire construct of the current world is based on those frameworks, whether it's peer review and making sure that knowledge is controlled by the Royal Societies of England, and then now the Western universities. So any force like this, or any knowledge systems like indigenous knowledge systems which still exist in India, like Ayurveda, are definitely going to be considered a threat, because they don't want anything that does not follow the modern principle of so one of the points that Miranda made was that, the giloy, for example, is toxic. So there are certain sort of, Ayurvedic medicines that were used during the Corona times and distributed through the Ayush medical system that the current government has formed. And she was really against it. And she said that there is a toxicity to it. Well, the toxicity was in the COVID, I would say. And, the fact that they think that extraction of a certain biochemical alone is the way to go forward is a modern principle of nature is inert and man is the power above it, and not even women. Man is the power head, so women have been sidelined, which is why they had to fight that fight in the Western world, whether to get the voting rights, whether to a lot of things. So the whole idea of extracting a biochemical is again a man-made process, and they want to keep that whole idea that a natural product is not as safe and good as what is man-made. That whole idea of man at the center of the universe and everything else around him and inert is the cause of all the ecological damage, is the cause of all the wars and all the sort of inorganic ways of living that we have come to, and all the side effects that many of the modern medicines, which as Indians and those who have practiced naturopathy, and known the use of turmeric on a day-to-day, use of neem on a day-to-day basis, for us it comes, it's just intrinsic to our knowledge systems. And that is what they are against, So you have to understand, it's a very deep-seated economic model that may be disrupted if a government supports it. So, the politics of it cannot be separated. The economics of it cannot be separated from this attack. That is the point. And the last point I want to make here is that, COVID has exposed it completely. We've seen, whether it's Vioxx from Merck, or we have seen various other medicines that have had such serious side effects, but, nothing happens to the modern systems. But during COVID, HCQ, the quinine component, which was supposed to be helping India, Australia, Japan, some other countries kept using it, but the Western world were completely against it, So HCQ, there were so many studies which were actually false studies. I've written an article on this, and the Lancet actually published a very fake study, and it was completely revealed that there was some actor or some, one porn star and some weird people who were part of that team. And they were supposed to have created that position paper on HCQ, and which hydrochloroquine or something, that's the full name of it, which is an anti-malarial drug. And, we were using it, many countries were using it, but they were not approved by WHO, and which is the World Health Organization, or the US. So, it's a very complicated subject, but ivermectin, I think one of the studies that was done was that people were, so I don't want to go to the whole technicality of it, but the fact that they wanted to promote certain medicines, which would be, of course, more, generative in terms of revenue, versus HCQ, which is like, it's an open source medicine right now. So they don't want that, So I just want to tell you that the witch hunt that happened in the ancient times, not so ancient times, again, 1600s or so.
Trials. Yeah, of course.
Right? The witch trials were happening because of the same sort of thing, that these women used to practice a certain sort of, system, whether it was faith-based or, healing-based. These were the women. Women were the upholders of many of the knowledge systems in the ancient times. Wherever there was, even in India, before the British colonial systems came in, the women used to be the holders of the seed. They were the holders of the water. You still see Rani Ki Vav and all of these sort of, big structures, because the women were in charge of water. They were in charge of the seed. Anything that was regenerative was supposed to be the women's stronghold. So the fact is that those ancient civilizational constructs, which they obliterated through witch hunts in the Western world, or through obliteration of entire indigenous populations here, that is at the loggerheads. Because if you remember Meera Nanda's statements, she continuously kept saying that it's $1 billion industry. It is going to be globalized. It's $1 billion. So we have to understand that what we are faced with is a threat to an entire lifestyle, an entire civilizational construct, because of those, Enlightenment era principles that nature is inert, that and so man controls it. That and I'm just ending. And peer-reviewed, knowledge. So knowledge is controlled, and the wealth is controlled by these oligarchies, right? Which completely decide as to who can come up in and what systems can come up, what medicines, what products can come up. So it's a whole system that is feeling a threat by a civilizational construct like Hinduism.
So they actually want to, obviously the whole idea of not negating the indigenous traditions is really critical. And I think you brought up a good point there. And so that's why they're summarily dismissing the entire system. But the reason I feel is also because it is Hindu, right? And it has a very Hindu roots, the entire Ayurvedic system. They want to say, oh, no, it's not really Hindu. Sometimes they say that, it's really something else, that somehow Patanjali Rishi was not Hindu, all this stuff. Yeah. Oh, the word Hindu came about much later, right? So on one end, you say the word Hinduism came about much later, right? Through the colonial constructs. But then you also use the word Brahmanism, which also came about very much later, right?
Yes.
The entire word, the first time the word was popularized was in the 19th century. And it was by Monier Williams, who wrote a book on this. And unfortunately, I haven't finished my booklet, still going on cast. But as soon as it's done, Monier Williams wrote a book on Hinduism and Brahmanism. And that's where the word Brahmanism really got popularized. This idea that it's separate from the Hindu tradition. And so there's Vedism, which was the original Vedic Aryan, the Aryan quote unquote religion. Then came Brahmanism, which was the idea of sacrifice and these oppressive Brahmin priests and things like that. And then came Hinduism, which was the entire everything, including all the bizarre rituals and all the corrupt practices, castes, everything is the Hinduism part of it. So that evolution is shown by Monier Williams in his book, Hinduism and Brahmanism. So he also popularized the word Hinduism, by the way, which most people may or may not know. It was used before him, but he was the one who popularized it more through his books and the idea of this Brahmanism, things like that. But that is what is used a lot of times to talk about it. And even today in academic circles, that 19th century construct of Hinduism is still active, even after the whole decolonization efforts, independence of India, the dangers of colonization, things like that. Today's academic departments still continue to use colonial definitions of Hinduism. And in this particular situation, the idea of Brahmanism, right? So that is all connected in that sense. And so this whole idea of Ayurveda, right, is that ancient tradition, and it doesn't fit well within this idea that, oh, Hinduism is only caste, right? So the concepts of Ayurveda, yoga, meditation, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry in America. And you see the top CEOs, the top people doing yoga and stuff like that. But when in India, when people want to promote yoga and Hinduism, and yoga and Ayurveda, they're considered Hindutva extremists. Imagine the irony of that, right? This can only happen. There's an old Salman Khan song. It happens only in India. There's an old song where he sings this type of a thing. So it reminds me of that old song that it happens only in India, where you have these like dichotomy of people who somehow want to just self-destroy. It's just amazing to me. So anyways, let's move on. I think next phase so let's talk about what are the next
I just
steps.
want to quickly say that Sudhaji pointed out the fact that these women knew herbal medicines and they were targeted because it was considered unchristian, because they used to hold power, and people used to keep coming back to pagan ways of life because those women used to heal them. And that is exactly what's happening today, right? Yeah. Because today with Ayurveda, they're like, oh, how can you prove it? It is not being proved in modern systems. It is just being disseminated, So this is happening because the people are actually getting healed. Personally, I have healed because of Ayurveda, with many things. I've seen it around me.
It's also
not only Ayurveda, but indigenous native medicine here. Yes. If FDA will target it. If it starts working, any medicine, and then they will start targeting and they will, close shop completely. This has happened many times. So, the fact is that this is the target to Hinduism is because we are still continuing those indigenous practices,
Absolutely. So let's talk about what are the next steps, right? We talked for about an hour, about 45 minutes about, all the different issues that are considered. So what are some of the things that we should look forward to, right? Let's start with your thoughts. I know you were really involved in some of the big conferences that happened from the Hindu community. So I want to hear from you. What are some of the things that some of the thought leaders suggested, then as next steps? What is the way forward?
Mm-hmm. So I think actually there are a lot of thoughts, but first of all, I just want to say that, the threat is real. We have to acknowledge that, because like I said, the academia is not just doing theoretical work. This is translated to further, and the fact that they are constantly saying that Hinduism needs to end, the threat is real. We cannot dismiss it as some sort of just rhetoric. It is not. And it is going to be perpetrated. So we need to be prepared and armed with the idea that, how do we tackle this? How do we tackle this discourse? How do we make sure So some of the ideas that came about were largely that we need to continue to develop our indigenous systems, understanding of our own knowledge systems, because we have not. So far, our education system has completely sidelined any understanding of our native traditions or, creating modern bifocal lens to understanding our ancient principles, traditions, methodologies. So that is one of the most important things. We need to develop our systems, develop our own study of Indology, develop our own study of, modern methods of testing, whether it's Ayurvedic system, which I think coronal was a breakthrough, which is what scares them. Coronal, they did a three-phase trial, and it was showed a lot of positive results. And YouTube banned, any focus on those kind of medication system. But I think developing our own Purva Paksha also, right? Those three are I think the core points that actually came out. And the fourth point I might just add is that, there is in our constitution, it clearly says India, that is Bharat. But one of the points that Pandit Satish Sharma also brought out was that, Bharat, that is India, Bharat, because of the plurality of the Hindu systems and the way we think and operate, is why Bharat is India. If that element is eliminated, if Hinduism is eliminated, which they're talking about, we won't have that pluralism. We won't have that democracy. India shines as the sole single democracy in that region, in its true sense, the largest, and everything else there is authoritarian. So in the Asian region, India and Israel remain as the beacons of hope. So I think I do want to just end with that, because Bharat, that is India, is the reason Hinduism needs to continue to flourish, exist, and continue to thrive, because we as a civilizational force even bring a lot of these values around the world, as and have been famous as the model minority, which most people don't like to hear that, but I know you don't. But, I don't know how to put it succinctly.
Yes, I don't, but that's a different conversation. Absolutely. And for as far as I'm concerned, I think for me, the next steps going forward are Hindus need to come together like we did for opposing such Hinduphobia, open Hinduphobia. Let's not let other people define us. For too long, other people have defined us and we have just been answering them. We need to come up with our own systems and methods, our own conferences, our own academic peer-reviewed things, whatever is necessary. Many thought leaders like, Rajiv Malhotra ji, Dr. Vishwa Adluri, many others, there's a long list of people, even going back to Dr. David Frawley, Dr. Subhash Kak, many others from Dr. Arvind Sharma has written wonderful books about the native perspective on things, right? So we need to highlight those upcoming scholars. Professor Lavanya Vamsani has written a lot of good books on the whole idea of Aryan invasion theory, of women in the Mahabharata, bringing those people and having them talk about these types of indigenous perspectives, the sort of the dharmic perspectives is really critical. I think we need to do that. The second thing is we need to be out there. We don't talk, we only stand up when there's an issue, but we should be proactively engaging our lawmakers, our university administrators, our student leaders or students on campuses, supporting them. We also need to make sure that we are active participants in the political process. Again, Kona is a 501c3, so we don't particularly support one candidate or the other. But the idea is everybody, regardless of your political background, need to be involved in the process. Set up a meeting. Go to your local assembly person, your state senator, your congressperson. Spend 15, 20 minutes with them. Show them what happened here in this conference and why we have a concern here. And I can tell you, a majority of people, mainstream Americans, mainstream Canadians, are very sympathetic to Hindus in general because they see us as active citizens who are contributing to the overall well-being of these nations, right? And that's what people say that this conference was huge. It was not. It was not. It's not huge. If you look at the viewership, no matter what they claim, it's not that big compared to what went on in other things, right? So we don't need to be I would say there's a lot of hope that we shouldn't be discouraged by this happening, but it's a great way of learning. Crisis brings opportunities. So I think for us to learn is like, where is our gap? Where do we stand as Hindus in terms of actively engaging with the universities, with the political leaders, with different types of stakeholders, including our own students? Because I can tell you, working with a lot of students, you can see the fear in them. They're concerned. The reason they're not speaking up is because they're fearful that they have these professors who are in privileged, powerful positions that they have to go up against. So we need to give hope and backing to our students and say, don't worry, we're with you. The community is with you. You need to go and have a conversation with that professor, but also with the administration and say, how can you allow blatant anti-Hindu, Hinduphobia on campus where these people are calling for dismantling my religion? I have an equal right, just like anybody else, to practice my tradition without fear, without hate, and by being accepted, no matter what our differences are. We may not agree from a theological or religious perspective, but that's where mutual respect comes in. And in the whole idea, there's this whole concept of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I feel it excludes Hindus. Because if you're going to support such blatant Hinduphobia and dismantling of a religion in the name of, academic freedom, robust dialogue, freedom of expression, then I think there's a real problem here. Because that freedom of expression, we are not going to wait until someone is attacked physically on campus or outside and called, Brahminical, malignant Brahmin or something like that, right? These 5 last names, for example. We have students on campuses with these 5 last names. Now, if someone who's serious can really take and target these students and subject them to bullying, physical attacks, anything for subjecting so-called minorities or incorrectly thinking that, this is what Hindus in America, Hindus in Canada, etc. do. That's really so for us, if I had to conclude my thoughts, would be to say, we need to be actively engaged. We are going to be continuing to talk to administrators, political leaders, etc. So join us, join our task forces, join our advocacy efforts to really go and talk to these people, because we can't just be silent. It's not over. The conference is over. That's fine. And everybody has the right to organize conferences. We are, again, not against academic freedom. We are not against, you have a problem with the Modi government, you have a problem with BJP, good for you. Go ahead and do what you need to do. You can air out all the things you want, but do not target our religion. Do not target us as people. You can do what your political rallying is, what your political movements are, your political agenda, whatever that is totally fine. You have the right to do that, just like I have the right to do mine. But the moment you target my religion, I'm not going to find it acceptable, and you will find opposition from me. And I'm pretty sure there are a lot of Hindus that are feeling the same way.
Right. And, it has to become uncool for these Indian American professors or, academicians to support these kind of, conferences. Somehow I feel like the people who are speaking out these kind of lies, literally lies, about whether there's a completely different alternative reality in the academic world about what is, which I said is far removed from what Pew Research found on the ground or Carnegie Endowment found on the ground. Secondly, the superimposition of South Asian politics into our mainstream here, city councils talking about CAA, congressional hearings on Kashmir, and then the farm laws, and I mean, why is this being encouraged? I think that to me is also a very big concern. I feel that we have been looking at this for the past 1.5 years, and then now this is sort of the crescendo that it has reached. So hopefully, we have to find a way to sort of nip that out of the system. America has its own issues, United States needs to look at its own issues rather than point out fingers to what's happening in India, in Shaheen Bagh or wherever.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole point.
Yes.
Like a small city council is worried about a issue going on in a 10,000 miles away. That is a telltale sign of what they're busy with and what they should really not poke their fingers into. And that's a great point. So let's do this. I think we have some questions.
Yes.
So let's take that. Let's say the first question is, will Kona be creating a document that community members can share and discuss at local levels? The answer is yes. We're going to be creating some information. Some of it is already there on the website, but over the next few days, you'll find some information being created. And if you are on our distribution list, please join, become a member, join our distribution list. You'll be getting an email in terms of some instructions. The second question is also related to that. How should an alumni from one of the universities supporting DGH reach out to the university? And I know, for example, Sudhaji, some other folks have done this very well. I think this is a really important point. So if you're an alumni, you can actually write a letter. So wait for the stuff that we are producing. So once you have that, you can take that, set up an appointment, a call with your alumni relations or the university administration, say, here is the information that I would like to tell you. And you had supported this conference in the name of academic freedom, but here is blatantly anti-Hindu information. And if you have one of those 5 last names like I do, please go ahead and use that and say, look, my last name and students with my last name have been singled out and targeted in this conference. Is that acceptable to you? So as an alumni, if you are donating heavy money, it's also very important. But if you're not donating money, but you are just expressing the concern, use your contacts, use the resources, and do reach out. Again, we're not against academic freedom. We need to be very clear on that. But it's about singularly targeting individuals and singularly targeting an entire religion or people. That's what we are concerned about. Here's a question for you. This may be a long answer, but let's see. How did you pull off the 3-day marathon conference? And what were, they want to hear, it was really awesome. So what did it take?
Actually, it took a miracle. If I have to say it in a short, one sentence, because frankly, I had no idea that it would become such a big affair. I got to know about it. I was called at about just a week before, literally. And, so we started to about a few women, actually. So it's Shakti, Shakti rising, basically. And that's what India and Hinduism actually brings to the world, The sacred feminine has been lost in the world except in India. And that sacred feminine, I think, was with us, at that time. So the kind of conference that happened, we could never have imagined. We planned just a week ahead. And we got 100,000 views, in various different platforms. Everyone came together to support us. Whoever I called, they made time, and pretty much, it just went ahead. And I think there was a lot of interest, and the idea that there was such a huge attack on us, and openly, blatantly, I think it really riled up people and also galvanized people to come together. So I really cannot take credit for it. It was a miracle. It was the sacred feminine and our own Shakti. And, it just happened. It happened.
Yeah. And I can tell you, I couldn't make it to the whole conference because we had another event going on at the same time. But at one of the sessions that I logged in, there were 54,000 people watching.
Oh, wow.
It was like 54,000 people. And I was like, whoa. And if you look at some of the DGH conference, you had 17 people watching. So you can see the difference. And again, it's, I mean, we talked a lot about the conference itself, so we don't want to give that too much of thoughts more than now, but this is a good wake-up call for us, and it has galvanized. Probably, I've been in the US for 28 years, and the single largest galvanization of efforts that I've seen in the last 28 years has been with this conference. So it's a good thing. I'm thankful that this actually happened, because it's really important that the Hindu community comes together, from the local music group to the local businesses to the largest temples to the largest spiritual groups, who often don't come together, right? It took one conference, outside conference, to then bring everybody together and make a noise from, as a united front. And that's where they keep saying that it's a bunch of a few Hindutva front organizations, right? They call a whole bunch of groups Hindutva front organizations or RSS front organizations to silence us. But no, it's not about us. We have data to prove, and we have already shown it on our website. A letter from 150 authentically signed temples, organizations, groups, etc. Some of them are not Hindus, right? They're Jewish groups. They are polytheists / like pagan groups. You have all kinds of people. So these are not Hindutva groups. So just to say that these are all Hindutva organizations, that is such a lie, and it just shows the falsity of the organizers and the people behind it. So now let's see. There was, I think, one more question that came up. Let's see. There was. So which universities have disowned the conference and which have doubled down? We have some information, but we don't have it on me right now. Richardji, I think we know a few universities. One particular university that I was really interestingly, there were two universities, but one was UC Berkeley. And this, is familiar to you. UC Berkeley's department actually doubled down. And you can see the director, he basically said that, I've received thousands of emails. I don't care what you say. We're going to go ahead and support the conference. Well, now we know. You can go back to them and say, okay, you just supported one of the most Hindu-phobic events that have ever happened, right? So University of Southern California also put out a similar situation. I think a whole bunch of universities kind of gave the standard, we support academic freedom. All right, well, now let's go back to them and show them what they just supported.
Exactly. I'm sure, this is against anything that is American. It's un-American to say, bluntly. It's undemocratic to say it clearly, and it's xenophobic. So this conference is absolutely a no-no from any university that is supporting this. Has to really, now apologize to Hindus if they really mean business with us, because, and if they're American in any which way. So
absolutely. So I think we have all the questions. Oh, okay. Who was behind the conference? So that's an interesting conversation to be had. There were a few groups that we know about that are behind the conference. You can probably go to the website and you will see the names of the conference folks who are behind it. Look at the organizers. You will see some of the folks, but there are some groups that were part of that. You have the Indian American Muslim Council, the Hindus for Human Rights. You have the Polis Project, a whole lot of groups that supported the conference. Students Against Hindutva Ideology, including the South Asian Scholar Activist Collective that was started by Audrey Trushke and some of the other folks who are listed on the SASAC Collective. There's a new group called Feminist Critical Hindu Studies Collective. Dr. Shana Sippi and a few others that we talked about today are part of that collective. All of these groups were supporting the conference. There are other groups who are obviously not in the forefront, but they did support the conference officially or unofficially, right? And some of them names that I mentioned are not official supporters, but if you look at their Twitter handles, if you look at their constant tweeting of the conference in support, it's not that hard to tell who is behind that, right? Similarly, there are a whole bunch of academics. So there's an endemic Hinduphobia within the academia that comes out from this conference. And I can tell you many of the 1,100 academics have no clue about this conference. They just signed on because the organizers and some of the people behind it went to them and said, hey, the Hindu nationalists are attacking an academic conference. You need to sign this letter saying that Hindutva is not Hinduism and this is an attack on academia, so on and so forth. So they said, okay, sure, I'll sign it. But they had no idea of what was going to be said at the conference, because either they just closed their eyes, or they decided to summarily dismiss the entire Hindu community as Hindu extremists, and therefore they signed it. So these are the types of organizations. And if you go to their website now, you see that there is a support from major, the American Historic Association and all these types of groups that are signing letters of support. So if you have any contacts with some of these groups, you need to go back to them and say, here you go. You are basically supporting open hate against Hindus, including people with certain last names that are singled out and targeted. So that's what we are really up against. But any closing thoughts on your end, Richaji, before we end?
Actually, a few of them, I guess, but I think I will end with the fact that, this is a churn. I'm hoping something good will come out. It's like a manthan, some wish will come out, but hopefully there will be some amrit at the end of it, where we will be able to decolonize these Hindu studies, Hindu religion studies, as well as the Indology studies through this process. Because now that our eyes have been opened, I'm hoping that these organizations that you mentioned, or the universities that you mentioned, will also look at it more closely because of our interaction. We have to be the squeaky wheel that gets the grease and make that noise, because otherwise, this will just be like that one conference that happened, and then, we wake up again the next year when it shows up again. So I think those probably are some of my closing thoughts. And yeah, I think I will end there, because I do have some other things, but I think it'll just carry on. But I think this is the most important thing. We have to continue our be active and engage with the universities.
Absolutely.
And I think the one thing I wanted to mention is that we need to probably do some sort of a survey of these universities, our students, continue that, on a regular basis, and make sure we are aware of which universities to avoid. Because 52% of the NRIs actually study, according to the Carnegie Endowment survey, study in these universities. So we are paying a lot of money. We have academic chairs that are, our institutions, departments that have been funded by Hindu Americans or by Indian industrialists. All of that needs to be considered. Because money is what drives all of the narrative right now.
Absolutely.
And this, the fact that we're not a mainstream voice. So we need to get there.
Yeah, no, we do. And I think time has come for us. I would bet you that this type of conference will continue. If people are under the idea that, this was just a one-time event, it's not going to happen, you are mistaken, because this will continue, whether it's this conference or some other conference. You will always continue to have that. And that's what they do. They do best. And that's what they are either paid for, or that's what their ideology is, right? So we have to understand, what are we about? What can we do as a community? How can we ally with those who know that the community is actually a good community and there's nothing wrong with the community? But even if that is not the case, how do we convince those allies, right? Even those who disagree with us on things, saying that you may disagree with me, but are you going to then have dismissal of an entire religion because you disagree with them, right? That's not acceptable for anybody. In today's pluralistic world, where we want harmony, diversity, inclusion, equity, all these buzzwords that are now introduced from a social justice perspective, where do Hindus fall? That's my question to everybody out there. Do these things include Hindus or not include Hindus? Are Hindus to be excluded from this idea of mutual respect, partnership, allyship, diversity, equity, inclusion, all of these types of concepts that are very active right now? Where do Hindus fall in this thing? If there are indications, and I know there are, Hindus do deserve a seat at the table, and we demand a seat at the table, because we're not going to be on the menu. We will be on the table, not on the menu. So that's what we are up against. We want to make sure that we work with people with respect. Even these academics, right? We may vehemently disagree with them, but we're not stopping their right to do what they need to do. It's just that do not target our religion. That's what we are against. If you want to target ideologies, if you want to target, governments, that's your freedom of speech. But if you're going to summarily dismiss religions, including Hinduism, we're not going to stand up. We're not going to just sit quiet. So that's where we are. I think we're at 5:30. So I want to respect everyone's time. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. And thank you for all the questions and answers. And Richaji, always great to have conversations with you. So we'll continue more of these. Thank you and namaste to all.